I've said it many times and in many ways. One of the reasons I find the Bible so believable is that it shows people, even the great figures of the faith, for who they are: flawed, fallible, weak. In today's reading from 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul makes this point better than I ever could. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, June 2nd, 2023. In late 1946 or early 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd was doing what many bored young people do. He was chucking rocks and trying to get them through the small entrances to some caves in the hills that were above him. One of his rocks made it through a small cave opening near the ruin of a settlement once called Qumran on the barren northwest shore of the Dead Sea. When this particular rock reached its target, the young shepherd heard something he wasn't expecting: the sound of pottery breaking. He didn't know it then, but he had made one of the most important archaeological discoveries in history. For the clay jar that he broke was just one of several in that cave, and that cave turned out to be just one of several containing these clay jars. And why were these clay jars so important? It is because they contained ancient Hebrew biblical texts that were roughly 1,000 years older than any known Hebrew texts at that time. If these texts hadn't been stored in clay jars, it is doubtful the scrolls would ever have been discovered, if they had survived at all. This was the discovery of what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls. In certain religious traditions other than our own, the heroes of the faith are frequently portrayed as strong, almost superhuman. They become models to emulate, and the sacred texts downplay their faults. The Bible, both the Old and New Testaments by contrast, portray human beings, even the great ones of the faith: Abraham, Sarah, Moses, David, Peter, Paul, with unflinching realism, exposing their flaws for all of us to see. Speaking of himself and his own flaws and weaknesses, Paul writes, "We do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies." What an arresting image! Treasure in clay jars. It is a reminder that the mysteries and the proclamation of the faith are not entrusted to perfect people, as if there were any, but to regular people like you and me. And why? So that no one confuses the message with the messenger. Like clay jars, we are breakable. We crack under pressure. We exhibit flaws. You might even say we are little more than cracked pots. Not to say that we are crackpots, though we may be that also. One of the complaints most often leveled against the church is that it is filled with people who say one thing and do another. Hypocrites. To which I say, well, of course. I often say, only somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that we only take sinners and hypocrites in the church. Yes, sometimes our faults and frailties overshadow the message, but there is never any confusing us for the source of the good news. The power belongs to God and only to God, and the one in whom we see God face to face is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ. In Him and in Him alone we see the face of God perfectly mirrored. His message is the message of God. His mercy is the mercy of God. His grace is the grace of God. We are just messengers, pointing, if only imperfectly, to the one perfect source. Like the clay jars near the Dead Sea, We are imperfect vessels of a precious message, for it is always through people like you and me that people come to know the good news of God's reconciling and redeeming grace in Jesus Christ. We are clay jars. Tomorrow, Paul applies another useful image for us human beings, earthly tents. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.